أخرى لتأمين الحماية التي تحتاجين إليها. فيما يتعلق عذرا لا يمكننا أن نسمع صوت ريجين جيدا وبالتالي تتعذر الترجمة.
Productions that are not necessarily sanctioned by different states with problematic funding. If there was more of a consensus, sort of a group effort to make the issues that are preventing certain kinds of actions from taking place, it would be feasible for different steps to be taken by funding agencies, for example. I think that I've been part of this too, where I've applied for funding that was basically for civil society projects rather than art projects, because that was the kind of available, and the idea is you just do whatever you can to get the funding because the project is more important. But I think it's actually a mistake, and that is one thing that I did from that instead of doing things like that, accepting those kinds of terms, it's about not accepting those, having people not accept those, so that the sort of dispersed change and that funders will have to actually change the terms that they fund under and sort of provide more support for the sort of artists that don't necessarily have access.
Why do you think it was a mistake to accept certain or to direct towards certain types of funding?
I think it just sort of allowed that to be an okay agenda for funding. Like I said about sort of civil society projects, I don't see why students in Baghdad, for example, need to address issues of civil society that are hugely complex and issues that don't necessarily it is not necessarily their role to answer. So I think that, playing into this kind of thing where this kind of funding is important only because it rests on the problems and conflict in that area, is helpful, in fact, because I think all it does is repeat the idea that those people are only important so long as there's conflict.
Because we had the lecture of Khalid Malas yesterday, who maybe you know his work, talked about pirating the art world to support certain projects in Syria. Do you think there's a possibility of pirating the world of civil society organizations in order to support the kind of initiatives you're talking about?
Maybe, and I think that's sort of how I might have justified it to myself, that you're sort of using that funding and able to do something different with it, and support people in a different way by using those funds. And, I'm sure some good work happened, and I am glad that some of the students I worked with had the opportunity to work on projects that they did, but I don't know if it was necessarily, I don't know if I necessarily went into it thinking completely that I was pirating this and using it for that purpose, and I don't know if the funding that was being given or if the students really saw it that way either. I mean, I think it's one thing for an artist to go after it themselves and decide that they're pirating it. It's another thing for me to decide that I'm pirating it on behalf of students. And maybe that's where the problem is.
Hello, Rijin. It's Mohammed again. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm going to move it away from sort of concrete and empirical examples and information, and talk about in the context of also my own paper, which I gave here a few days ago, and also Anna Pinto's paper. And I see the common thread running through them in a more abstract way is this sort of deep geopolitical understanding of how these regional conflicts and these problems can be mapped on and then get related to the art world. And I totally appreciated the way you brought in the Black Lives Matter from the US and superimposed it to the rest. And just how do you think it's possible to sort of foster this way of looking at the world, not only from not only within the global art world, but sort of foster this in a larger intellectual community around the world who really wants to sort of understand how things work and in isolation, but is unable out of a fear of too much generalization or too much sort of reductionism to sort of like make these type of commentary that are very like abstract, general, but also needed, in my opinion, in order to understand this complexity?
I guess maybe just not being worried about how it sounds. I mean, honestly, I think there's just a lot of caution about talking about politics and art. You know, on the one hand, there's this idea that, you know, art shouldn't be politicized and it's too politicized, and I found the opposite to be true. I found that it really doesn't deal with politics in any real sense. Or seldom does. Sometimes it does, but I think not often enough, especially when there are these, you know, huge implications that are very political that sort of drive all of this work. You know, even if you're not making work that is dealing head on with some sort of politics, you know, there's always something political about where your work is, where it's shown, how it's being seen, you know, all of these different aspects. So I think, I mean, for me, I just think it's about not being afraid to look at making certain kinds of connections, or even if they're clunky, and even if it doesn't work in the beginning or in all cases, you know, it's more, I think I welcome any sort of fostering of a kind of discussion of politics and how it's used. And then working through that and making it less clunky and sort of looking at how it might connect. Because if we're not connecting these kinds of things, I mean, I don't know how you can look at, you know, the kind of different, you know, systemic issues that are taking place in politics all over the world that are so interconnected, and I don't know how we could isolate those things from each other or how that would be productive. It is general, needy, but it's a lot of these different strands aren't necessarily isolated from each other. So I don't actually think the generality argument is always accurate, even if it seems like a generalization is being made. I think if you look deeper and more deep, you know, sort of more rigorous about scrutinizing all of these different aspects, it becomes sort of clear that it's not general, unless it's just sort of, you know, unless it's just sort of a wide, you know, everything is terrible, which is, and I think that's just lazy politics.
Thank you so much. Other question? Yeah, just one sec. I'm going to pass on the mic.
Hi, Rijin. This is Christine. I have a question, kind of looking at the flip side, looking at the US. You're based in the US, and we see and we know how complicated it is, where money comes from and how it gets filtered into the arts. What about what's happening in the US or exhibitions around art from the Arab world? Do you see the same thing happening there with institutions in the US, whether it's a private institution or it's publicly funded, or do you notice kind of different trends going on there?
Well, I think the similarity, well, first, you know, one of the differences is just that with institutions in the US, you can at least try to see if they're, you know, sort of where they're coming from, where the funding is coming from, if it's an independent organization, if it's affiliated with a university, how that works. Beyond that, though, there's also the issue of how, obviously, like how exhibitions are themed and what's shown. I think maybe the most, and I think I touched on this in the talk, but one of the biggest things that strikes me is this idea of art building bridges, or art being a way of investigating politics from the Middle East. And I often get, you know, inquiries or emails about, you know, are there any Iraqi artists we can include? Are there any videos from Iraq or paintings from Iraq or whatever it is? Because there's a sort of exhibition taking place, and, you know, and certain countries need to get ticked off. You know, so, and it's, you know, harder to get or go to Iraq and get pieces, so they want to know if there's something from there that they can take off the list. So that, you know, that's a problem, although that's not just a problem in the US either. The idea, though, of the art from the Middle East being exhibited as a way of learning about politics and seeing a certain kind of politics is an issue for me, though, because I think it's again saying that if we understand Arabs through art, then conflict won't be happening. Or maybe this will be a way of understanding what's going on. And that can't be farther from the truth. I don't think that understand conflict by looking at artwork. I think you understand it by looking at a whole host of information and evidence and history and writing. So that's another way that it sort of transforms, you know, it's a sort of conflict resolution or looking at, you know, sort of a way of trying to understand some kind of other foreign entity where that it really isn't, you know, these things aren't so far away. There's exhibitions about Arabs and Middle East and all of this, if it's removed as if America isn't actually keeping Arab and Middle Eastern population with a lot of different kinds of art and narrative and articles and whatever it is available. So I think it passes off, again, this idea that the Middle East and what's happening there is this huge mystifying place and it's so complicated, it's so convoluted, and maybe the arts with its magic powers can do things. And I think that helps to, you know, to act in a way that doesn't sort of look at what is actually the case of things are happening in it. I'm not sure if I'm making a lot of sense at this hour, but I think that that's good. That's the issues I've seen with exhibitions in the States.
Any other questions? Last call for questions, and then you can email them to Rijin. No? All right, I'm going to take the liberty of concluding this talk. Thank you so much, Rijin, for being here for the questions and for your presentation. Hope to see you soon here.
Thanks, Christine. Thank you.